I always love this pregnant pause. They're waiting to go live. Oh, we are live, so I screwed that up. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this UK in a Changing Era lunch hour. Today, we're going to be talking about the state of the left in UK politics. And just as a heads up, in a couple of weeks' time, we shall be doing the same thing for the right in British politics. But I'm delighted to be joined for the moment, because we are expecting one more person, by Andrew Fisher, who's a writer, broadcaster, trade union official, and was executive director of policy for the Labour Party. Is that right, Andrew?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, and I know I'm surprised too. Under Jeremy Corbyn. And by Jane Green, who is director of the Nuffield Politics Research Centre, professor of politics at the University of Oxford, based at Nuffield College. You will know her face from the telly and particularly from her work doing general election coverage every time for ITV. Welcome, Jane. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Anand.
We're waiting for John McTernan, who was political secretary to Tony Blair and has become a political strategist and a very well-known one. So when he turns up, you'll know who he is. If he doesn't turn up, then you two are going to have to do more talking than you bargained for. But let me just kick you off by saying, just looking at the field of left of centre politics in the UK at the moment, what particularly strikes you about it? This is your softball starter for 10 before we get into more detail. Jane, do you want to kick us off?
Okay, yeah, very happy to. State of the left. I don't think you can think about the state of the left without thinking about two things. One is just how low the vote share for the main left party, the Labour government, was. And it's really easy to forget these things. It's easy to forget with the Lib Dems on 72 and Labour with their massive stonking majority that actually the Lib Dems didn't increase their vote share very much, neither did the Greens. And actually, the Labour Party had a tiny increase in its vote share. So historically, very unpopular. And then add to that the second point that you need to understand, and we can talk about the psephology and who's voting for them and who they're going after and all the rest of it. But the second critical thing at the moment is just the very, very high degree of fragmentation, right? So lots of parties competing for small shares of support, and that making everything feel so much more unpredictable, so much more volatile. And, with Labour halving their support in a year, which is just unheard of for a party of government. So, if that's for me, that's the context, right? So that's the context into which you've got to think about, like, you've got multiple parties on the left now competing for small vote shares, highly fragmented context, and everyone's pretty unpopular.
Thank you. I had faith, John. Everyone else was writing you off. I knew you'd turn up. Thank you for being here. The question, and we'll go to Andrew next to give you a moment, is basically sort of initial reflections on the state of the left in British politics at the moment. So, Andrew, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Jane in that it's very fragmented. I don't think that's necessarily a shock to anyone. But if I look at my own experience of it, there are people like me who I used to work with. People who I used to work with who are in the Labour Party still, like me. There are people I used to work with and have virtually the same views as who are in the Greens. And there are people who I used to work with who are very enthusiastic, or at least were until last week, about the prospect of your party being set up, or perhaps not, by Jeremy Corbyn and Zarah Sultana. And it is very fragmented, but I try and take a step back from that and look at where we are politically as a country. And I think the material basis for the left ought to be quite good at the moment. There ought to be a quite clear story to tell about the state of the world, the state of the country, the cost of living crisis, the housing market, social security, all those things. I think the left has something to say about and articulate. And I would say probably, and I'm going to try and be as non-partisan as I can in this, until the election of Zack Polanski in the last week, nobody prominent from the left has been articulating anything like what we would think as a left response to a lot of these issues. And that's not to say the Labour government hasn't done some good things. The Employment Rights Bill, which is still going through, obviously the Renters Reform Bill, which is still going through, not in law, will be small steps forward, but they've not been core parts of Labour's narrative. And that is the problem. It hasn't come across as a coherent argument. And actually, the things that they have been pushing hardest have been the things that have been alienating people who would identify on the left most of the time. And I think that's why we've got this very fragmented picture, which is going to be really interesting how that evolves as we get towards the next election.
Thank you. John, welcome. Oh, we can't hear you. Oh, there we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So I want to agree with Jane, agree with Andrew a bit and disagree with Andrew a bit, which is the context of UK politics is stark. There are 5 viable parties in England. With 5 viable parties, just look at the context of Labour within the whole arena. That means on 21% of the vote, you can get plurality in a seat. The problem that Labour has, and every party has, apart from Reform, is that Nigel Farage has been supported consistently by about 30% of the population. He's renewed it over the decades, but basically 30% is irrelevant in a 2-party system. It's massively relevant in a 5-party system, which is a 6-party system in Scotland with the Nationalists and in Wales with the Nationalists. It's potentially a 7-party system if your party survive this fragmentation, this splitification they're going through, and it's potentially an 8-party system if Elon Musk gets a party up because he believes that Farage is too woke. So that is a massive fragmentation. In the middle of this sits a Labour Party, which has got a prime minister who is unpopular because he was no change from Sunak. And he actually became the heir to Sunak. He's Rishi's heir. Sunak was unpopular, and Keir took on the burden of the unpopularity of prime ministership, which has dragged him down to historic lows. But interestingly, the Labour brand is more resilient than the prime minister's brand. At 22%, it's actually responding best than you could imagine, actually, with a prime minister who's so unpopular, partly because of the things that Andrew's talking about, which is that there are some really big progressive changes going through: nationalisation of the railways, the intervention of the steel industry, the renters' rights, workers' rights, all this that one could give. But at the core of it, something's going wrong. And in my view, I'll just summarise this now shortly. The problem is, I don't believe that any of the lefts, and particularly the Labour Party, are actually meeting the moment. This is a moment of absolutely transformational change, whether it is climate change, or whether it's AI, or whether it is the geopolitics, whether it is the fact that we have a choice between 2 of the blocks in the world. You've got a stable president who's a communist, an unstable president who's a fascist. And no one's meeting the moment in politics. And I think that is a huge problem for the left, and it's a huge problem for the Labour Party in government.
Okay, interesting. Just to say to the audience, which I forgot to say at the start, do vote for the questions you want me to put to the panel, because that makes my life easier. It means I can just look at the top of the list. We have a really good question, actually, from Anonymous, which is a shame. So, hi, Morgan, which is basically saying, well, I'm going to paraphrase it a bit, which is basically saying, what do left and right mean? Is there such a thing as left and right? Because conceivably, if you look across Europe, what people sort of lazily refer to as populist right-wing parties have got very left-wing economic agendas. And have those terms lost any analytical bite of late, do we think, because we have this sort of 2-dimensional politics going on?
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to sort of, I can give you I reckon everyone has a notion of what left and right has meant, right? But I think the question is a symptom, isn't it? The question is, we don't know what our left and right parties stand for, right? So just going back to what John was saying, and also what Andrew was saying, I think, there are 2 big problems, and I'm coming back to the left-right thing, I promise.
Okay, I will remind you.
2 big problems, right? We've got an economic context which is miserable. And when right parties govern over those kinds of miserable moments, people shift to the right. You tend to see radical right populist parties doing better. And then Labour comes in, and there's a sense, obviously, that they want, people want some kind of solutions. And I think, there's two problems, and I'm not going to pin it all on Keir Starmer, but I think there are two problems for Labour. They come in, and first of all, everybody feels a bit like, it's all negative, it's all nasty, it's not hopeful. But the second key problem is they do a load of things that confuses the hell out of everyone, which is, what do they stand for and who do they stand for? And so that is a context in which populist parties also thrive, right? When mainstream parties don't have a sense of vision and narrative that helps people, especially in the context when the vision and the narrative, and here I'd echo Andrew, needs to be about this primary thing, which is people's worries about their financial security, right? People are very, very worried. And that's what our research shows very, very clearly about the economy. So that's a major problem. And so which of our parties, going back to John's point about this splintering and how many parties, which of them can we really say we know what they stand for? We know if they're left or they're right? People know what reform stands for, even, which is ironic, right? Because actually reform don't yet have anything like a clear agenda for government. I think people understand historically what the Greens stand for, but because of the complexity in our political landscape, because of two-dimensional politics, because Labour comes in without a clear sense of what they really want to achieve, it seems at least, you get a sense that I don't think people have a clear sense of what the Lib Dems stand for, what the Labour Party stands for, or indeed what and who the Conservative Party stands for anymore, because they've radically changed. I mean, the Conservatives have radically changed.
Yeah.
So you can understand why you'd ask the question, what does left and right mean, when we can only really define it at the sort of, not the extremes, but we can only define it for a couple of parties in our system right now, excluding the nationalists, where we have a clear idea.
I will come to you in a sec, John, and I will come to you, Andrew, after that. But just quickly, Jane, because in case there are people who are scratching their heads a bit, and I use the phrase first, so it's my fault. Can you just explain what two-dimensional politics? Yeah.
Two-dimensional politics. So, we used to have the political world where we could understand left and right, domestic economic policies, bread and butter issues, class politics. That made sense, right? So we have a dominant dimension. Now, bubbling under the surface are these other issues. And they're not on that first dimension. I hope people can see my hands. They're not on that first dimension that's horizontal. They're sort of somewhere cross-cutting it. They're somewhere up here or somewhere on an angle. Essentially we have issues. And what that means is, because they're in a different dimension, is you can be on the left and have an attitude that's pro-immigration or anti-immigration, or you can be on the right and also sort of like Brexit or not like Brexit. That's how things were. We had this two-dimensional structure, and the smaller parties did well on that second dimension, on the environment, issues of immigration, issues of nationalism, and so on. Now, with Brexit, the dominant two parties started to coalesce around those sides. And now we can say the Conservative Party is really a side of the right economically, but also probably the right on Brexit, more leave, a bit more socially conservative now. They've certainly gone into that direction. So you start to see the right as being right on economics and right on those other issues. Now, the left is still a bit of a jumble, right? So the left isn't probably as well defined in that way. And it's why we see that splintering on the right. Now the Conservatives became unpopular. Their vote had become very, very right and socially conservative and pro-leave. And then it can go to Nigel Farage, because that's what their vote is comprised of. So two-dimensional politics, sometimes they coalesce more into one kind of mega thing now, where we understand what the Tories are, but there's still other dimensions that the Greens and also the Lib Dems and also the Labour Party, I think, are still positioning themselves around two sets of issues.
And of course, there are an awful lot of people who would have called themselves Tories who now say they're politically homeless.
Yeah, exactly.
But
and one reason turnout was so low, I think, last time.
Yeah. John.
Yeah, look, to be honest, the two dimensions of current politics are racist, openly, reform, and a little bit racist, which is the Labour Party and the Tory Party. And those are appalling dimensions, because I think in the end, there's the football question, I call it. Yeah, who are you? So people don't know who the Labour government are. Why? They remain confused why the winter fuel payment was taken away. They remain confused why the Labour government tried to cut disability payments, because no one in history has voted Labour to shrink the welfare state. It's a direct problem with your brand identity. There is a left and a right, I think, still a left and a right. And I loved Keir Starmer's conference speech last year because basically, if you want to summarize it, it was one war, the class war. He did actually say that he was on the side of the working class against the boss class. And that is still, for me, a working definition. The balance of power has moved from Labour to capital. And there's a very coherent argument to be made that you need to rebalance that power. I disagree that populist parties, I disagree with you, Anne, and the populist parties on the continent are in any way left-wing on economics. They are nostalgic on economics because they want to go back to a world in which women knew their place, people of colour knew their place, men earned a household income. It's a whole set. It's a nostalgic conservative image. To go back to the past has got nothing of the left about it. That's a very conservative view. And look, and I think the dimension that's entering our politics, but on top of it, which is connected to but separate from the racist dimension, is the Ulsterification of our politics. The way that the flag has come to England, and the way that the national question has gone to Wales. The two parties competing are British nationalist reform and Welsh nationalist, and the two applied. The two parties competing in Scotland, the SNP and Reform. Scottish nationalism, utterly surprised that there could be a viable British nationalism, and that Ulsterification was there in Unite the Kingdom as well. Their big march. That march reached far deeper into public opinion than Tommy Robinson should have been able to in our politics.
I don't want to get into an argument. I don't want to be involved, but I would say that I think what you say might be true of the AFD. It's less true of Geert Wilders. So I suppose it depends.
It's true of Rassemblement.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I always have Wilders in my mind just because he's such an interesting.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, look, and I always think about Holland, the Netherlands, because the Netherlands is our future. A Labour Party utterly destroyed by being in government.
That could be worse. You could have met underwater. Anyway, Andrew.
Look, I think the terms left and right still do have meaning, and they should have. I think they're ill-defined by our current political class is definitely true. But you look at our society, we have millions of workers who are on insecure work, who need universal credit to make ends meet, need housing benefit to pay their rent. We've got record numbers of families that are homeless. Wealth inequality is the widest, it's probably been in my lifetime. We are in a very unequal society, and economically, the terms left and right should mean something. And I think, if I was, let's say I was advising Keir Starmer, a wild notion that would probably give him palpitations as well as me. But if they'd come in, as they did in June 2024, and they said, we've got these fiscal rules we have to stick to. We've got to stick to our manifesto pledges on tax. So I can't do what I would want to do necessarily, because I would have made those arguments in advance. They would have said, what can we do? There's no money. There's not much money to play with. We didn't put any tax funding pledges in our manifesto, really. I would have said cap costs. Water bills went up 27% on average this year. I think 47% if you're in Southern Water, 31% in London and under Thames. Cap it. Just say no. That we're going to cap it at inflation for the next 3 years. Same with energy. Same with rents. Lots of countries, lots of cities around the world all give mayors the power to do it, but make that cost of living argument no cost to the government. Just say to corporations, you're going to pay the cost of this. You're going to absorb some of it. People have had enough. Put a windfall tax on the banks, which had 2 years, 2023 and 2024, of record profits, and use that to reduce mortgage interest rates, so that people who are coming off of a fixed term mortgage that are suddenly going from 1.5% to 4.5% or 3.5% aren't then hit by hundreds of pounds of payments. And what does that do? It puts more pounds in people's pockets. You would have got more economic growth because people would have spent it in the economy. And you haven't had to raise taxes and break any manifesto pledges. That's a very left-wing thing to do in the circumstances we're in now, where you can't do the things we were advocating in 2017, say, where you could borrow very, very cheaply and do massive levels of investment. That's gone a bit, or your scope for that has reduced. And so, that's the sort of thing we ought to be doing. But that isn't what they did. And I think John's exactly right. people are confused what they stand for. They don't know who the Labour Party are, and therefore they're walking away to people who are defining it. And I kind of feel, the rise of reform, which has been alluded to, perhaps not fully explored yet, is in part because of that. They only look so big and like this big juggernaut because everyone else is on their knees at the moment. Everyone else is so inept, whether it's Kemi Badenoch's Tories or Keir Starmer's Labour Party. Reform's got to walk in the park.
I mean, I have to say that there's one issue that really sort of illustrates to me how sort of unmoored politics became over the last decade. It was energy price cap. Because, from being an Ed Miliband scheme that David Cameron called Marxist to being a scheme that Theresa May brought in, the world had sort of turned on its axis in such a profound way. It was quite hard to sort of figure out who was where and what was what. But anyway, on one of the interesting things, one of the debates we have about the Labour Party at the moment is that they're focusing far too much on the threat to reform and not understanding the fact that, according to the polling I've seen, the majority of the voters they're losing are to their left, not to their right. I mean, the Conservatives have a massive reform problem, but Labour have a problem on both flanks, and arguably a slightly worse problem on their left flank. Is that true? And if it is, do you think that Labour are doing this wrong, basically? We'll start with Andrew. I haven't started with Andrew yet.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Jane will know this far more than I do, because it's her job to. But looking
that's why you're going first, so she can disagree.
Exactly. So so she can correct my work, like a good academic. But look, the British election survey data tells us that it's basically 2-1 from my reading of it, depending on how you define the Lib Dems. But I think people are switching to the Lib Dems as a slightly more socially liberal kind of party to Labour at the moment, as it appears. So yeah, I think it is, and I think that's only going to get worse, and we're going to see this play out a lot at the next set of elections in May. I suspect, if things stay as they are, because they are Labour heartlands, and in a sense, I'm not going to disagree with John because I'm not sure he fully put out his reasons why, but I don't think people in Wales are moving to Plaid because of Welsh nationalism. I think they're moving to Plaid as the more progressive party in Wales than Labour, and people are turned off from Labour, but actually in Wales they've got an established progressive party to go to, and at the moment Labour is polling a very, very distant third in Wales. And to put that in context, Labour, since 1999, when the Senedd was set up as the Welsh Assembly originally, has never not won the popular vote in Wales. It's always come first in those elections, and it's going to come a distant third. At best, it might become a bit part player in a Plaid-led government. That's pretty unique. I mean, that's on a scale, and I think it's probably one of the most under-discussed things in British politics at the moment, is how Labour is kind of hollowed out in Wales. Maybe because we haven't seen it electorally yet. I think we're about to. But Labour's likely to come third in Scotland at the moment on the current polling I've seen, although it's much tighter between second and third. And in the UK, clearly the Greens are making good gains. They're currently polling over 10%, around 12-13% in a lot of polls at the moment. The Lib Dems are gaining, and from the speculative polling before last week, which you have to take with a pinch of salt, your party would have picked up 10 to 15% on a couple of quite reputed pollsters' figures. So there is an appetite out there for something to the left of Labour, and I think for a party that can cohere and get its act together, as Plaid obviously has as an established party in Wales, as the Greens are beginning to in England, and I suspect they'll get huge gains in London, I think that is a much, much bigger problem. And in some ways, from my perspective, we need it to be, because we need to drag Labour back to a position where it looks at where it's losing its votes and thinks we've got to offer something to those voters. And at the moment, it's not doing that.
I'm going to come to you in a sec, John. Just then Jane can correct everyone's work afterwards. But just to pick up on one thing, Andrew, you said people are going to the Lib Dems because they're seen as more socially liberal. Aren't the Lib Dems also in some ways seen as economically more left-wing? I mean, it's the Lib Dems, after all, who are talking about a tax on banks, aren't they? So in some ways, it's not just so. I mean, the social liberal thing's a bit weird, isn't it? Because there are noises about the Lib Dems backing identity cards, which I thought was interesting. But aren't the Lib Dems trying to appear to the left of Labour on the economic axis as well at the moment? I misread that.
Yeah, maybe a bit. I just don't think it's as prominent. I mean, Jane can correct me, but I mean, my hunch, and it is purely a hunch, is that it's more to do with progressive views on migration at the moment, and I think that's probably the driving force rather than taxation, but it might be partly that as well.
John.
Look, I think it's interesting the way that Andrew has reduced his ambition since the 2017 manifesto, and the list of things that you said, Andrew, that Labour should move back to are piece by piece just transactional. And I absolutely think that the time for transactional politics has gone. The achievement of the 2017 Corbyn manifesto and its matching achievement in supporting the country was it offered transformational change by identifying massive issues and real problems and find a solution for them. And I genuinely think that the government is missing the moment and will basically the left inside the Labour Party have become a kind of John Smith movement. It's kind of one more heave. Let's have this government with a more, I don't know, voter attractive prime minister who can be a little bit more left-wing, a little bit less stupid on social security. That's not it. Everybody in government at the moment, to my mind, is missing the point. Unless there's something really big done, the country's going to vote for change. It's voted for change. In the Brexit election, it voted for change by voting for Corbyn in 2017. It voted for change by voting for Johnson. The change that the country wants is an end to neoliberalism. And every time you vote for an end to neoliberalism as a voter, you know what Treasury say? They say to the Chancellor, by the way, you can't really give up on neoliberalism. That's all we've got. That's the only way of managing this economy. And we're doing this in a context where the President of the United States is saying, in terms, central bankers are high priests, and it's time to debunk the role of high priests in our economy. He's got the right problem, the wrong answer, and that's the thing. I do think there's a need to go to because the cost of living is downstream of housing costs, and housing costs are downstream of the housing market. I do agree with rent controls, but I actually agree that what you actually need is a transformation of the housing market, and the government is the largest landowner in the UK, I think, after the royal family and the church. But the government could transform. It's the governments everywhere, UK government. During COVID, governments met change with change, met change with pace, met change with innovation, met change with transformation. And then they went, we've forgotten how to do that. And I think that's the fundamental issue. If you don't go back to fundamentals, the question is not who are you, but what's the point of view? And I think what's the point of view is, and the Labour strategy, just to give one section to the question you actually asked, Anne, and the Labour strategy is really clear. It is socialism or barbarism. It is Farage or Starmer. It's Labour or reform. And the problem is you cannot pose the question socialism or barbarism without offering a tiny bit of socialism.
It's so French, isn't it? I mean, I get the impression Number 10 want our election to the second round of a French presidential where
yes. No,
you vote totally against the people you hate.
Totally.
That presupposes Labour's the main opposite or the main threat to reform at the next election, though, and I don't think that's a foregone conclusion at the moment.
And I will let you come back to any of that, Andrew. Now you've been sort of wet centrist by John. I'll give
He's very centrist for me.
But let me turn to Jane first, and then I'll give you a right of reply, Andrew.
There's a lot here, actually. There's a lot to say. Trying to think how to do that really, really briefly. So first of all, Andrew's right. He's describing the British election study data that we are analysing and we put out. It's about 1/10 of Labour's vote has gone to reform. It's about 1/5 that's gone to the left, and it's about 1/5 that's gone to undecided. And so the left and undecided are the places where the greatest losses are happening. Now, one thing I think is very confusing, however, for everybody, including Labour. And I wrote something yesterday, and so this is very, very fresh. And I've got, my wonderful co-author Marta is working on it today. We'll hope to put it out next week. So very, very fresh. But what we're trying to explain is this problem of what Nigel Farage says is Reform now want to park their tanks on Labour's lawns, right? Horrible expression, actually, because it's war and all the rest of it. But anyway, aside from that, and I remember on election night, and Andrew mentioned that in the introduction, and it's just because those election nights, they're so powerful for me because you see what's coming, right? And in the moment, and Nigel Farage said that in his first interview, right? We've gone for the Tories, now we're coming for Labour. What's happening though is that Labour can lose places to reform, right? So it's losing councils to reform, it may lose constituencies to reform and so on. But they can do that without losing lots of voters to reform. But that's very confusing for people because it looks like reform are making inroads into Labour-y places. So there's two problems. One is that can come about purely because the right's continuing to split and Labour's vote is splintering very broadly. So essentially Labour, the threshold to overpower Labour is just getting easier for any right party that can coalesce on the right. And that's continuing to happen because the Tories are losing support. So that's the first thing. The second thing, though, is that the reason Labour's vote is splintering left and undecided primarily is because its vote changed, right? So its vote became more progressive, younger, more graduates, and so on over time. And so I think there's this kind of, in a sense, if Labour's trying to go after Labour reform people, they're sort of trying to win back voters they lost 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Yes.
And they're doing that, I think, because sorry, I can't even say it, an ecological fallacy, which is that thing of taking places and thinking it's your voters, right?
Yeah.
And what we're analysing is how Labour's vote is fragmenting irrespective of the kind of place, right? So even in Labour heartlands, to try to make this point that just because reform might take Labour places, they're still taking a very small proportion of Labour voters. Yeah. And so what does that mean? It means that Labour really, really has to worry about its left and the undecided. And Andrew's right to say, in a very fragmented context, if Labour assumes voters will back us because we're the best party placed to stave off a reform threat, that only works if you can understand that Labour's ahead. And in a highly fragmented context, that can get incredibly confusing. Also, Andrew said that he thinks perhaps one reason Labour voters are going to the Liberal Democrats is they're more concerned, they're more pro-immigration. I think that's very likely to be the case in our wider analysis of what's happening. The Liberal Democrats also on the left are getting the more affluent kinds of voters. So going back to, are they left? Are they liberal? What are they? They have done better amongst those sorts of conservative voters who felt very uncomfortable with the conservative shift to the right. And they've done that amongst more liberal people on the left, sorry, more affluent liberal people on the left. Not maybe left if they were Tories, but but depending on how you think about it, more centrist. Anyway, there you go. The other thing, of course, is just finally is reform can do better because of the continued split on the right. And this is unheard of, that what we think of as your main opposition party is not benefiting from the collapse of the government, right? Yeah. So the Tories are decreasing at the same rate as Labour at the moment. And that also looks confusing, right? Because you see these lines going down and reforms going up and you think, well, reform must be taking them equally from Labour and the Conservatives. Doesn't have to be true. Reform's taking its support from the Conservatives and currently doing better amongst non-voters, of which there are more, because in 2024, turnout was very low. Yeah. However, here's the good news for the other parties. Final thing, in our analysis of British election study data, it looks like the non-voters have a similar propensity to possibly vote for all of the other parties, right? Maybe not as much for the Tories right now. So, but Reform are doing better at translating, mobilising. So that's how you can get that Reform increase without it necessarily coming from the left. It's also how Reform can take Labour places without taking lots of Labour voters. And it's because predominantly Labour's vote has changed over time. The end of the sermon, sorry.
No, that's fine. We're going to come back to a couple of those issues. I think the time one, how long this has been going on, is fascinating. And I think we're going to have to talk immigration as well. But Andrew, I said I'd give you a right to reply to John if you want one.
Oh, I think John was just being a bit cheeky. He knows I still stand behind a more transformational approach. But, I did caveat my remarks by saying if I was advising Rachel Reeves and sticking within her fiscal rules and her tax pledges.
Yeah.
But if I was allowed outside of those, I'd obviously argue for something a great deal to the left of that. And I think part of Labour's problem, to make a semi-serious point at the end of this, is that ahead of the election, they did not do that. And then when they came in and did a budget that did raise a lot of taxes, did do things like the winter
You
fuel
couldn't
payments
claim the
cut,
credit.
they didn't do it. It just confused people. They hadn't prepared the ground, and you've got to do that in politics. I think you've got to be honest and try and win the argument, not just
Yeah.
get into government and do things.
And that's the danger now, isn't it? That anything that Labour do in the next budget, just as with the welfare reforms, isn't seen as a principled approach to addressing a problem. It's seen as a way of saving cash.
Well, what's the argument? What's the argument currently being made to prepare the ground for the budget? What is? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, there isn't one, is there?
Because the government's not issuing one. The government's denying potential taxes, but that's just because newspapers are going to try and find it. There's no comm strategy around the budget apart from duck and hide.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. So just as a bit of fun, and because I'm a little bit curious, and Jane, you don't have to do this one if it takes you into partisan territory. Is there anyone who wants to give me a defence of first past the post, given our current party system?
Yeah,
Go on then.
it gives you strong government, and it does give. No, it gives you strong governments, and it's given this government the ability to ignore NIMBYs. So the planning reforms and the green transition, both of which have deeply, deeply unpopular things, that can be legislated for because Labour's got a massive majority. It means also that Labour can, in the next period, do a number of things, in policy terms, which will be there on be hard to reverse. But basically, the Labour Party got elected on actually a manifesto with a mandate for really unpopular things. And it's got the majority given to it to take that through. If you transform the planning and development and infrastructure system, you're making a really big change for decades. And that's actually why people vote for governments. They vote for governments that change things. And if you end up in a situation where you vote for a government, the country's going to reform because it's not had change. And it's voted repeatedly for more than a decade for change. If you then create a non-first past the post system, you will guarantee they get no change. Now, maybe that's better, maybe no change is better, but I don't know. The voters want change. It's the failure to make the change that's the problem, not the system.
Even in a system, in circumstances where we have so many parties and you can win on such a low share of the vote.
And that is a challenge to the parties to become the dominant one in their sector. The dominant right party, the dominant left. At the moment, Reform have managed that. They're the dominant right party. That's why and Labour's challenge is to become the dominant left party. And step one of that is to go, oh, actually, we are a left party after all.
Yeah. Andrew,
that's a failure of politics, not a failure of systems.
Right. Okay.
I mean, I don't think it's necessarily true because I think other countries in Europe, all of which have proportional systems, have managed greater change than our government has managed, and probably arguably in some cases more stable government than we've had over the last 10, 15 years. So I don't really take that argument. I think, look, I want a system that's more democratic, and that means, one that reflects voters' choices. And actually, I think it would force parties into making compromises, in the same way, not in a way I'd like, and probably not in a way John would like either. The coalition government between the Liberals and the Tories did have to make some compromises. Admittedly, it was mostly the Liberals that compromised entirely, but
exactly.
They did have to, and they did actually. It's the last government, I mean, maybe until now, that lasted a full 5 years. So, and they did make quite sizable changes, especially to the size of the state in some places. So, it's not, again, a government of my choosing, but I think it's possible to do that. And I think, I would find it very difficult to envisage that we aren't going to end up, certainly if the left revives, I can't see the pluralism. I can't see that it's going to go back into the box. Maybe it will. I mean, politics is very volatile. And if you'd asked me 5 years ago to predict what would be happening now, I don't think I would have got it right. I don't think anybody would. So, but I come back to democratic principles, which is, look, if only 20 or 30% of the population are voting for a party, they shouldn't be getting 60 odd % of the votes in Parliament.
It is incredible, though, isn't it, how quickly things change? I mean, in 2015, we were talking about fragmentation, the end of two-party politics, and then in 2017, we were saying two-party politics is back. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
over
Ah.
80% vote share between the two.
But
look,
2017 and 2019, they were very, very, very different elections.
yeah,
but the
On
Labour Party's problem has been it won a really substantial majority in 2005 with 34% of the vote. It lost to a landslide on 34% of the vote, and it won a landslide on 34% of the vote. The fundamental problem is insufficient people like the Labour Party. So what's it been doing? And it's like the most popular Labour leader in the last 3 decades is actually Jeremy Corbyn.
Jane, did you want to come in on the electoral system?
kind of.
You don't have to go into it.
I mean, I think that John is
silence.
absolutely right to say it's a failure of parties, not a failure necessarily of the electoral system. So, I mean, you cannot think about the last election without looking at the really, really terrible loss of support that the Tories experienced, and without seeing that Labour had not won public affection and trust, right? I mean, you really can't understand that election without thinking of those two things. Hence, we get this hugely disproportionate outcome, right? I mean, not hence, there's lots behind that as well. But you have to see that as a failure of politics, I think.
Yeah.
The other thing to say, and it's a little bit more kind of tenuous if I'm honest, but we had in the last election not a big endorsement of a Labour government, but my God, did people make sure that they got rid of the Tories? So in sense of like delivering the popular will, that stonking majority for Labour was a reflection of how much people wanted the government to change, even on a 34% share of the vote, right? So I mean, we didn't do this, and perhaps we should have, or, it would have been a lovely thing to go back in time. But if we actually understood like how much, we didn't have a good sense of broad consent for that outcome. We just look at vote shares. But actually, if you were voting, we know there was loads of tactical voting, right? So if you were a Liberal Democrat voter, you were more likely to get behind Labour in the race if the Conservatives were fighting a Labour candidate than if it were a Liberal Democrat Conservative. If you were a Labour voter, you were more likely to get behind a Liberal Democrat if it was a Liberal Democrat fighting a Conservative voter. If you were a Green voter, you were more likely to vote sincerely for the Greens if it wasn't a really competitive race where you could have voted for a Progressive Party. So the broader sense of anyone but the Tories worked very, very well. Obviously, it did it on a very low vote share, but I take John's point. I don't think that's a symptom. I mean, of course, it's a symptom of the system, but it really is a failure of politics.
I mean, the other thing worth pointing out about the election that I just think is fascinating is the way that incumbents everywhere lost votes, which is just fascinating. I mean,
yeah, which again speaks to cost of living, doesn't it? I mean,
well, except in Spain and Mexico, where the governments in question capped prices, and they not only capped prices, the leaders of those governments had weekly televised and broadcast chats to the public. And so they told the story of this government is responding, this government's doing this for you, and it was AMLO and it was Sanchez. So it's the ones who realize the policy levers available to you are not simply the ones that neoliberals would tell you could use. Now, so the ones who came through it are people, and in similar terms, when Albo won his big majority, the biggest majority the Labour Party have ever had in Australia this year, that is because they renegotiated the social contract with the voters. They explicitly understood that there needed to be a different offer to the voters to meet them halfway, kind of thing.
Okay, so radicalism is effective, I suppose, to put it in a
well, it's your only chance as an incumbent, I think.
Yeah. So just talk about radicalism. I've got a lot of questions coming in about your party. I mean, Andrew, you've written about
whose party? Yeah.
I think that's subject to litigation at the moment.
That's true.
Sorry.
I thought it wasn't as a gesture of goodwill, but
well, on one side, but let's see. Go on.
Are they going to resurrect themselves? Do you think they can become a serious party and a real political force?
all joking aside, I think the fact that 800,000 people signed up to register
Yeah.
an interest in that party at the beginning tells you two things. One, there is a huge enthusiasm for that kind of politics and a demand for it within the electoral space we have. Some of that, I think, since that happened or around the same time, has been eaten into by the Greens with Zack Polanski, who, to be fair to him, has been ubiquitous on the media, being prepared to take on his opponents in debate, make arguments, win arguments, contest it from not just a technocratic position, but from a moral position on things, as well as talk about policies. I think he's been quite impressive. That's not to say I think he's flawless or the Greens are going to fly, but let's just put this in perspective. The Greens, I think, were boasting the other day on social media, they've put on 20,000 members in the past month, which is impressive. But from the time Zarah Sultana, perhaps preemptively in retrospect, announced the membership system to 90 minutes later when it got withdrawn, that party had 20,000 members sign up in 90 minutes. So I think there is something that, there's an opportunity there for the left, for that kind of socialist, overtly socialist left to tap into. Can it be resurrected from where it is? I think they're quite tarnished by the last 48 hours or 3 days, because you just don't look like a serious leader or even wannabe leader or wannabe co-leader if you are threatening on social media to sue your supposed partner. I mean, it's just not credible. And, if that had happened, anybody sane would have gone, right, I better get on the phone to them and sort it out in private.
Yeah.
And we'll perhaps move this over, or we'll perhaps do this, or we'll come to some accommodation. And maybe that story would have leaked out a few days later in the press and been a bit of a gossip thing in Playbook or whatever, but it wouldn't have been the dominant story. And what that's done, I think, is affected people's faith in either Jeremy Corbyn or Zarah Sultana, although credit to Zarah, she's actually, rode back from it and said, I got things wrong, I responded wrong. It's a shame that hasn't, as of certainly when we logged on, been reciprocated. And I don't think that reflects very well on people. But can they turn it around? Probably not. It'll probably never be what it could have been, is my response. I think there is still a market for it. I think there's still market's a terrible word to use, but there's still a space
Better
for
than
it.
thanks.
Yeah, there's still a gap for that in the political landscape. But I think they have probably handed Zack Polanski a bit of a win there, because I think a lot of people will go, actually, the Greens are saying much the same thing. They're a stable party. They've got an articulate leader who doesn't seem to be picking fights with his own party. Why not give them a chance?
Because actually, the last election was so weird in so many ways, but one of the other remarkable things about it was the number of independents we saw getting elected.
Yeah, and I think we see that in the locals in May as well.
They were very much so. Yeah.
I think we see that in a lot of places, and that's partly due to for partly similar reasons, that Labour's purged a lot of its own councillors and alienated a lot of them as well. And so you've got groups like the Broxtowe Independents and others, in Liverpool, we've got a couple of seats already on Liverpool City Council and so on. And I think we'll probably see a little bit more of that, as well as the swing to the Greens.
John, you've got your Simpsons hand up.
Yeah, look, the long-term thing that's moving through the Labour Party is that Gaza is going to have as big an impact on Labour as the Iraq War did. The Iraq War gave us, Jeremy, the Gaza, the legacy of Gaza and Labour's mispositioning on Gaza is going to have a huge impact on the Labour Party. I don't know anybody in the Labour Party as a member of the Labour Party, including myself, who agrees with how the government's position itself in relation to ceasefire. So I think that's a huge problem for them. But I think in terms of your party, there are two previous. I mean, there's three parties, aren't there? Big parties over time, significant parties over time, who split from the Labour Party, and what's happened to them is very significant. The ILP split and they withered. The Scottish Labour Party split in the 70s, and they were taken over by the IMG and destroyed. They changed the host body, the Labour Party, and they changed politics. I mean, without them, probably no Blair, and without them, no Cameron. But they don't exist anymore. They got eaten by the Liberals, and so the fate of parties breaking away is very variable, and Labour has a strong tradition of the worst thing you can ever do is split, and that's because that's a very strong Labour value. Unity is strength. So I think the splitting normally hurts you in Labour history, but the split is now happening within the split, which I think is potentially irreparable.
Jane, did you want to add anything?
Just to say that, if the left is serious about this political moment and genuinely is appalled by the idea of a reform government, I'm not taking a stand, I'm just saying if the left is taking a stand, then the last thing you do is splinter further. In fact, what you have to do is coordinate. And that comes back to the first past the post question. It comes back to what we discussed about the splintering of Labour's vote and so on. It comes back to how Labour won such a large majority in 2024 and a low vote share, right? It was because without the parties coordinating, there was a lot of electoral coordination to stop a party on the right from having success. So the very last thing you would want to do is splinter. And also just to mention the Greens, because it's the Greens that we see picking up votes amongst those younger voters who feel financially insecure. Right, that's what we see is, the problem of our context again, the economic difficulty, the pain, and all of the worries that people have with cost of living, bills, and so on. Essentially, if you don't look to Labour, who do you look for? And so it goes back to our point about the Lib Dems. They're picking up the more affluent side of the left vote. The Greens have been picking up the less affluent side of the left vote. Now, clearly, your party was really about independence in very, in specific areas of the country and trying to build a movement out of that. And those independent MPs, arguably have been elected based on worries about Gaza and so on. But it's the Greens who are picking up that left-leaning, economically insecure group of voters. And I think, they're the ones to watch, just like Andrew was suggesting with Zack Polanski, because it's, essentially that's where we already see something. And I know that, there were some polls done saying that the notional support for your party could be this. We don't know, right? We can see where they might kind of get support based on where the independents have done well in the last election, but we don't know. And I don't think we ever will now.
Can I just ask you one question, Jane, as a follow-up? I mean, we should have had a Lib Dem on this panel, I think. That's the problem with being a party that claims to be centre. If you're doing events on the left and the right, you get left out. But so John Curtis was quoted in the Times today as saying that the Lib Dem strategy is wrong. And the Lib Dem strategy, as he saw it, was we're going to extract even more Tory voters than we did last time. And I think John's rationale was you've got all the Tories you can get. You need to be targeting Labour now. And if you're not targeting Labour, you're not serious about being a party of government in the future. Would you agree with that? With all due respect to John.
Yeah. I mean, yes and no, but I want to talk about lawns again.
Okay.
So we talked about places and people. So the Liberal Democrats took support. There's two points I want to make. The Liberal Democrats took support from Tory areas, and it looked like they'd sort of reached a ceiling. So they were getting support in Shropshire and in the West Country, places, affluent conservative areas, right? Now, you can still do that, compete with conservative places by taking more votes on the left, just like Reform can do well in Labour areas by taking more votes on the right. Yeah. Sorry, I know it's very confusing, but it's true. So I would still argue, because there aren't many constituencies where the Liberal Democrats and Labour are in contention, or haven't been historically, and there aren't many more Conservative Liberal Democrat constituencies. But John's right in one respect, and another I think I'm going to challenge him, right? So in the respect that he's right is because the two parties have really coalesced into blocks, the Conservative vote became much more right-wing. It's going to split more naturally rightwards, not leftwards, right now. So in that sense, he's right about the voters. But where I think he's missing something is about fragmentation and where Liberal Democrats could now take seats. So if you've got 5 party races and you've got a Conservative vote that's continuing to fall, suddenly actually you can win seats on very small margins. And so the honest answer is, like, probably there's lots of Labour and Conservative constituencies now where the Liberal Democrats could be in contention. They'll probably get more support on the left than they will from the right, because of that's the way the parties have moved to in different directions. But they absolutely shouldn't write off going for more conservative places.
Okay.
And that's because of the fragmentation. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, John, you're wrong. There we go. That can be our headline.
But John, you're right. But you missed something, maybe.
So we're running out of time. I really want to get to the long-term question if we can, because I always think we never talk about it. But just very, very quickly, Keir Starmer's doing this. I don't know whether it's a relaunch speech or it's a take on reform speech, but he's meant to be doing a speech on Friday ahead of Labour Party conference. And from what a couple of you are saying, at least, you think that should be the speech where you set out your stall to bring together, to lead the left. And you sort of, set out your stall as the leader of the left-wing bloc in this country, as it were. Is that right? And is that what you think he will do? I mean, no, this is a silly question to ask, but I'm quite curious. Jane, you don't have to do the guessing if you don't want to, but I bet John and Andrew will do it. Andrew?
I don't think he's capable of doing it, is the honest answer. I don't think he's capable of leading a left bloc. I think there's too many kind of red lines for a lot of left-wing voters, which is why we've seen the fragmentation. So I think he needed to do it much earlier if he was going to do it. Is he going to do it now? Possibly. I think there has been a kind of, there's obviously internal pressures at the moment within the Labour Party because of the deputy leadership election as well, which is why you've suddenly got these noises about the 2-child limit all of a sudden. It's definitely always been a vile policy, even though we suspended our own MPs for voting to scrap it. There's this kind of movement now, and we've seen with the recognition of Palestine, no actual substantial practical application of that, like suspending all arms sales or imposing sanctions, but we recognise Palestine. So I think it will be a bit like that. It will be the kind of sit on the fence, I'll posture one way, but then by next week or the week after, he'll be back the other way a bit as well. And that, I'm afraid, is why he's doing how he's doing in terms of his popularity, and Labour's doing what it's doing in the polls. I don't think he's capable of doing that. And, I speak to MPs, Labour MPs across the party, not just on the left. None of them think he's going to lead Labour into the next election. And I think that's the issue. I think already it's kind of known he's not going to be the candidate. Whether it's, Andy Burnham coming back in from the north to lead us to victory is a different matter. Whether it's, Wes Streeting versus Ed Miliband or anybody else, who knows? But I don't think it'll be Keir Starmer, and I don't think he's capable now of leading a left bloc and reuniting that vote.
I think one of the most remarkable and depressing incidents of this government so far was the aftermath of the Island of Strangers speech, where on the one hand it was sort of disown the language, and then I think a few days later it was actually no, I think I probably did mean it after. I mean, it was a very curious incident.
I think it's a perfect encapsulation, actually.
John?
I think the contamination of Labour politics by Cummingsism is almost complete now, isn't it? That on the one hand, the government and the whips decide that they can just suspend you from membership of the PLP because they disagree with your political views. Not a thing we ever did under New Labour. Not a thing that's been done, actually, since the 50s in the Labour Party. That was a Cummings thing. They suspended 50 Tory MPs, and that was their way of wielding the power of the Prime Minister. Extraordinary intervention into the Constitution by Number 10, and just adopted by Labour as being that's a thing you can do. And now this discussion in the Labour Party, which is like, yeah, you know what? Maybe Keir won't be the leader of the Labour Party, as if it's a genre, it became a genre under the Tories, as if it's a genre that ever has a successful outcome. Do you know what? Let's do what the Tories did and change our leader, because that really led them to succeed in 2024. And I think there is space. In my view, in politics, it's never too late until it actually is too late. There's always a moment that you can do things. And you can imagine a Prime Minister who said, the world's changing, but some evidence is in already. We know that smartphones should be banned from schools. That's it, we're doing that now. But on top of that, we know that social media is a toxic discourse That has to be regulated globally, but we're going to start leading on that in the UK as we've done on the online safety bill. We can go further. We know that AI is we can regulate AI. Actually stand up and go, we can do these things. Government has power. We will move as fast on housing and the housing crisis as the government did in COVID. We'll learn from COVID task force. We can apply that thinking. But you actually, if you stand up and you go this and this and this and this and actions, the thing that Trump is good at is he knows politics is declarative and it's action-oriented. Executive orders, who cares about the content of them? That's got to be contested in American politics, but government can make things change. And it's the feebleness of the government going, not really sure we can change very much. No one voted for reasonable change within the bounds of the law. They voted for change.
I have
So
to say
a speech like that would mobilize. It would create a new constituency. That all leadership is creating.
That night of the Trump inauguration, when he signed executive orders on the stage, was one of the most striking images from politics I've ever seen, I have to say. And I just thought, God, this guy's good. Trump, I was going to say Trump. You're called Jane.
The speech.
Oh, that's a first. Oh my.
Easily confused.
I'll never live that down. We're not clipping that, people, before we start.
I'm not sure we can recover from that one. So here's the thing, right? So are we saying that Labour and Keir Starmer can recover by coalescing the left? Are we saying that? I think that's your question, right? And is that what he needs to do? So whether he's capable of it or how he would do it, like, would it be enough? And I think my response is yes, but I would also say, and a bit more, because you've got to remember again, my very first thing was like, the context is they won on only 34%. And John was saying they keep on getting 34%, sometimes good, sometimes bad for the outcome for Labour, but they've got to do better. So, I would say, yes, coalesce the left and give people a little bit more, right? It's what's the point of view? That's what John said, right? What is the point of view? Who do you stand for? What do you stand for? What is the point of view? Because you don't have to, and here's the final thing, right? You do not have to just choose left and right. Right? We're on a panel about the left, right? So we've talked about the left and the right for almost an hour. But you don't just have to do left-right politics. You can also do hope across the board. You can go for the people who are toying with reform because they're economically worried, without talking about immigration. Yeah. You can go for the people who are toying with not voting. They don't see a party that represents them at all because nobody's helping them with their actual financial worries and everything else, right? So for me, it would be coalesce the left, give people a sense of what you stand for, but also go for those people who are not ideological, who do not have a family party, who do not see themselves as represented by anybody, because those are the people who didn't bother voting last time round. And that's the way to get ahead, because you've got to not just go for 34%, you've got to top 35 in order for it to be a proper race at the moment. So that's what I would do. But, don't listen to me, I'm just an academic.
I do think
Trump.
Trump.
I do think one of the issues that has haunted Labour a bit is it was enough to win the election to not be the Tories rather than to be anything.
Yeah.
And I get the impression I've screwed this up. We're over time, and I haven't got to the thing I really wanted to talk about. So we will be in touch with you three again to continue this conversation, if that's all right, at some point in the future. But for the moment, thank you so much for taking time. It was a really, really interesting conversation, actually. And I think we've just scratched the surface of this. We will do this again. Look out for our next event. Well, we've got a couple of events at Labour Party Conference where I hope to see the three of you at some point. But we'll have our event on the state of the right in a couple of weeks' time. So until then, and I hope by then I'll have lived down calling Jane Donald. Thank you very much.
We'll work hard to make sure you don't have it.
And see you all soon. Thanks, all of you.
Yeah.